Coming up on the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast, how a clinical trial participant nearly dropped out because of pushback from work.
You can't actually do your job if you're down here in a clinical trial. And so, for a lot of patients, that can be a big barrier, just not being able to take time off or the financial resources.
Starting in 2025, there are new rules, and in part 2 of my series on the FMLA Clarification, a physician talks about the struggle to recruit and keep patients in clinical trials, while FSR helps us understand how the organization may have found a way to fix the problem.
The Family Medical Leave Act was put in place to make it possible for people to take care of their health or to take care of a loved one who needs support for their health and not have a risk to their job or to their insurance, to make sure that there is no loss of promotion abilities, really making sure that people are secure in those factors. And so the Family Medical Leave Act is put in place to ensure that for individuals.
This is the Sarc Fighter Podcast. Living with sarcoidosis and other rare diseases. Here's your host, John Carlin.
Hello and welcome to episode 148 of the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast. I am your host, John Carlin. The date of this recording is September 28th, 2025. That's the part where I am talking to you. The interview portion happened a couple of weeks ago. But I'm here today to talk about participation in clinical trials. Sarcoidosis patients are rare, so that makes us a commodity, right? I mean, think about that. Sarc patients are a commodity. Here's the argument. First of all, there aren't many of us, say 200,000 in the United States. So that makes it relatively rare. I think we would all agree to come across somebody who has sarcoidosis. And you probably already know that makes us members of the Orphan Disease Club. That's an expression, orphan diseased. Great. It's harder to find for us. It's harder to find doctors with experience if you have an orphan disease. And it's also a bit of a problem because sarcoidosis, as you know, can attack just about any part of the body. So we talk about the rareness of sarcoidosis, and then within that, there's this subset of rarities. Let's say people who have it only in their spleen or only have ocular or skin sarcoidosis, or in my case, neurosarcoidosis. The vast majority of sarcoidosis patients have pulmonary sarcoidosis, but that still makes you a rare person when you're compared to the general population or even the population of sick people in the United States or people with an illness. So on top of being rare, we have all of these specialists. And how many people have I had on the podcast who are Sarc patients who have said, yes, I have this ologist, I have a cardiologist, I have an ophthalmologist. So we have all these ologists who have to treat not only the sarcoidosis, but then the manifestations of sarcoidosis where it has done some sort of damage in your body, a neurologist, a pulmonologist. All right, you get the point, right? And there's a lot of folks out there who have 6 or 7 different specialists. So, and then we're going to add in the fact that there has not been a drug developed specifically for sarcoidosis in decades. So why do I say that then we are a commodity? Well, if a pharma company wants to study a potential drug in a clinical trial, then they, of course, have to find patients who are willing and able to participate. And let's face it, that's like trying to catch a fish in a lake that doesn't have that many, or looking for gold somewhere in the remote reaches of Alaska. Where do you dig? And if you dig, what are you going to find, right? Because there's more places that don't have gold than there are places that do. So I don't know, a couple of analogies I came up with, but the fact is that there's a lot of barren territory, whether you're using my fishing analogy or my seeking gold analogy. But let's get it back to patients. Researchers often need to find patients who, if they have sarcoidosis, don't also have some other disqualifying factor, something that might make the results blurry in terms of the research. So now, when you find a patient that qualifies, you're even more of a commodity. But let's look at this. Let's start breaking down the difficulty. Doctors would need to find someone who doesn't, for instance, also have another disease, someone who isn't taking another or the wrong medication, who has had the illness for the appropriate amount of time, depending upon what they want to study, or only has, say, lung involvement or only neuro involvement, or lives near a research center, or, right? It gets complicated really fast. And then the person has to be willing to participate, knowing that they might get a placebo, right? When you have these blind research studies, some people get the drug that's being tested, and some people get essentially a sugar pill, and you don't know which one you are. And then at the end, the researchers reveal all of that to one another, and they compare how the drug did versus people who didn't get the drug. And so that's how it works. But let's get back to the patients who think they want to participate. Well, they have to be able to travel, right? They might have to go to the medical center that's doing the research. They have to be financially able to travel, or have child care or pet care, or someone to care for maybe a senior adult while they're away. And then here's a big one. They have to be able to get the time off from work. And that can be difficult to overcome, right? Because it's out of your control. The people don't have any say in that. Maybe they can find the daycare, a neighbor, a relative, whatever. Maybe the clinical trial will pay for the transportation. They might even pay. I've talked to some that are looking at, okay, well, we've got these millions of dollars set aside for this research. Let's take a portion of it. If we have to pay for somebody's pet sitter so they can be gone for the day, we'll do that, right? We'll pay for that even, right? Not always, but I mean, that's something that's recently been put on the table in some cases. So, but if you can't get away from work, well, then what do you do? Because that's not up to your control. If your work says, we really need you here, or if they think you don't have a qualifying situation in order to be absent from your job. Well, that's where the FMLA clarification comes in. So starting this year, thanks to the hard work and the advocacy behind the scenes from the people specifically at FSR, the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, yes, little old rare sarcoidosis, there is a new clarification for the entire world of human resources. And basically it says you must be allowed to participate in a clinical trial without fear of losing your job. Now, to be clear, they don't have to pay you for the time that you're away for your checkups, but your job should be safe. And today I'll be talking with Ennis James, a pulmonary and critical care physician who specializes in sarcoidosis and is also a member of the Medical and Scientific Advisory Board for the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, and he works at the Medical University of South Carolina. And also joining me will be Tricha Shivas, who is the Chief of Staff and Strategy at FSR, and Tricha was a big player in getting this FMLA clarification pushed through. And Dr. James he'll be sharing with us an amazing story about one of his patients. She was facing a lot of difficulty at work. She wanted to help. She wanted to continue in a clinical trial, but she was really looking at having to make the choice to quit because of the issues that she was facing at work. And then Tricha is going to walk us through what a miracle it was that she and FSR were able to approach the government and create this clarification in order to pave the way for people to participate and keep their jobs. And that's not just for sarcoidosis, that's for clinical trials for any disease, all right? And so Tricha and Dr. James are joining me next here on the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the Sarc Fighter Podcast. You may be wondering, what can I do to help? How can I be a part of the sarcoidosis solution? It's simple. Make a donation to KISS, Kick In to Stop Sarcoidosis. 100% of the money goes to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Look for a link in the show notes of the Sarc Fighter Podcast. Welcome back to the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast, and I am so thrilled today to be able to introduce two people to you who really are making things tick with respect to FSR in general, and then particularly when it comes to a new development with FMLA. And first of all, I want to just say that this is part two of a two-part episode. In episode one, we looked at how the Ignore No More campaign led the U.S. Department of Labor's clarification that the Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA, can be used for clinical trial participation. We talked about why that is such a significant win when it comes to patients and also their family members, because that can be difficult as well. So we want to build on that conversation. We want to look at what this clarification means in practice and also how it has the potential to impact millions of patients all across the country. We're going to dig into the challenges that patients face in the workplace. We're going to look at how the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research and their coalition to transform clinical trial engagement together are working to break down those barriers with some innovative solutions, including the Champions for Change PTO, Paid Time Off Initiative, which expands employer support by providing paid time off for clinical trial participation. So that's a long way of saying that joining me today are Tricha Shivas, our Chief of Staff and Strategy at the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, and Dr. Ennis James. Welcome back, Dr. James, from the Medical University of South Carolina, where you're a member of FSR's Medical and Scientific Advisory Board, a clinical advisory member for the Ignore No More initiative, and a member of the Coalition to Transform Clinical Trial Engagement. So a lot going on there. So Dr. James, why don't you give us a quick snapshot of your role in this work?
Absolutely, and good to be back, John. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this project. So I am a clinician and researcher at Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston. We have one of the largest sarcoidosis clinics in the country, and largely in part thanks to a very generous patient and donor, Susan Perlstein, who donated a lot of money to help establish a center here. And as a result of that, we've really been able to make a lot of progress for sarcoid patients, and specifically try to do everything we can to increase access to clinical trials and research in the space.
And thank you, Dr. James. It's so great to see you and to be on this podcast with you. And thank you so much for your extensive work all across the last few years on this effort. It's been really incredible. So I am Tricha Shivas. I'm the Chief of Staff and Strategy at the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. And in my work, what is most relevant in terms of the work that I am doing for this particular project, I have been able to work alongside the incredible patient advisory leadership committee that we have through the Ignore No More efforts, and the clinician advisory leadership committee, along with a number of team and staff members to help drive these efforts forward, as well as working with our research team every single day and our scientific advisory board to make sure that we are making clinical trials available to all that are impacted by sarcoidosis.
So there's a lot more challenges to that than most people realize that don't have experience in clinical research. And unfortunately, a lot of that the burden falls on the patients themselves. So one big piece is time commitment. So a lot of the recent trials that we've done in sarcoidosis require visits for treatment every 4 weeks. And so, these patients often aren't local to us. And so they're having to travel from hours away and pay travel costs. Sometimes, they may have a study visit that lasts most of the day and they may need to stay overnight. Um, so there is a big financial impact, not only from that, but also obviously, you can't actually do your job if you're down here in a clinical trial. And so, for a lot of patients, that can be a big barrier, just not being able to take time off or the financial resources, or they've got multiple kids and they're having to juggle daycare and their jobs. So unfortunately, there are a good number of barriers to not only, enrollment, but also recruitment.
Yeah, it's difficult to just kind of pick up and leave, even if it's only once every 4 weeks, and take care of all those things that are happening in your regular life and just put that on pause for a day. Even if you're willing to do it, you gotta get other people to play along. And Tricia, I know that we got a lot of information from the SARC community with a survey. And we've talked about this on the podcast before, but let's just review. What are you hearing from patients? What are those barriers to participate in? And then do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Dr. James really put his finger on a number of those pieces that have been really critical for the patients. But, clinical trials are challenging also because people's jobs don't necessarily understand clinical trials. And many patients are also, challenged in terms of wanting to disclose or not disclose their disease. And so these present a lot of challenges that have been identified. And so, in terms of job security, a lot of our patients have identified that they are really concerned about being able to ask for time to participate in clinical trials. In fact, we had a woman when we did the focus groups way back when we first did the survey who had said that she had talked to her HR about participating in a clinical trial. And when she had discussed it with them, they said, well, if the trial fails, then you just wasted the company's time. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done at the corporate level to help people understand. And in that, it is really important for us to understand the hours and the commitment that needs to be made and think about the security we need to put in place for the patients in terms of those needs.
Got to make it easy for them to say yes.
Yeah,
Just take down as many barriers as you possibly can. And
absolutely.
we're gonna get to some of that here in just a minute, I think. But Tricia, if you would, for listeners who may not be familiar with this, what is the Family and Medical Leave Act? And now there's a 2024 clarification. What does that mean for clinical trial participants?
Yeah, so building off of what I was just describing and discussing, the Family Medical Leave Act was put in place to make it possible for people to take care of their health or to take care of a loved one who needs support for their health and not have a risk to their job or to their insurance, to make sure that there is no loss of promotion abilities, really making sure that people are secure in those factors. And so the Family Medical Leave Act is put in place to ensure that for individuals. But why we sought a clarification back in 2023 and received it in 2024 was because there is no language specifically around clinical trials. And in fact, there's some areas that leave some real ambiguity in terms of clinical trials. So the way the language is written, it discusses therapeutic benefit. And for those of you that know, when we're talking about clinical trials, that's a question mark. That's the point of the trial, is to understand what the therapeutic benefit might be of that trial. And so that was a loophole that was being utilized by some HR individuals to make it so that people weren't able to utilize their family medical leave in order to be able to take that time off. And so we sought clarity around that, and we're so honored by the way that the Department of Labor thought, really was very thoughtful in this, thought very long and hard about what the response would be. And this was after a lot of advocacy on FSR's end, and then through the coalition, we had over 40 Hill visits to have discussions around this and to really emphasize what the challenge was here. And then in November of 2024, we did receive that clarification from the Department of Labor. And that clarification says that essentially therapeutic benefit does extend to clinical trials, and that does extend to placebos. It extends to experimental therapies. So they are defining it very broadly. And this now protects anyone in America with any chronic disease who wants to take time off for clinical trials. They are secure in their job because of that clarification. And it also extended it even further to extend it to family member caregivers who are supporting those that are participating in clinical trials.
Yeah, I think we buried the lead because you just hit the big point, right? It's that clarification is going to make a huge difference in people's ability to participate in clinical trials. And it took you how many visits to the Hill to get that done? 40?
Yeah, 40 visits to the Hill.
Capitol, as in Capitol Hill.
Capitol Hill, right? Meeting with legislators and senators and representatives and getting champions to support us each step of the way so that we could get that clarity from the Department of Labor and be able to move this forward.
And so let's talk about why that's such a big deal for both patients and for clinicians.
Yeah, so this is such an important an important success for everyone who is living with a chronic illness. And the reason for that is if you want to take time off for a clinical trial, there's a lot of lack of clarity from your jobs a lot of the times. And what does that even mean, right? Clinical trials are often generally associated with stage 4 cancer. They're not something that people think of as people that are in the workforce necessarily participating in. There's a lot of education that we need to do more broadly around the country on the power of clinical trials, but it helps us now drive science forward for everyone. And the people that are participating in these clinical trials are making it possible for us to find better therapies. And so by protecting their time off, it makes it possible for them to make choices to be sure that they can have that time. Dr. James talked about sometimes it's 4 or 5 hours that you're dedicating to, being available to this and not feel like they're going to lose their job. And in sarcoidosis in particular, not feel like they're going to lose their health insurance. A lot of people are in these jobs for the protection of their health insurance. And for doctors, this is really important to understand so that you can extend the opportunity of clinical trials. And especially for many underserved patients, this is an opportunity for them to get even more specialized care and attention from the researchers. So being able to extend this opportunity to those that may not otherwise have this is something that really is now protected by this opportunity.
Yeah. So in other words, in layman's terms, you can now go and participate in a clinical trial without the fear of losing your job, right? I mean, at the end of the day, and if you've got sarcoidosis and you lose your job and you lose your health benefits, then you are out of luck.
Right.
Yeah,
And so
right.
a lot of people would decide not to, right? And the choice there is, I'm not going to participate in a clinical trial. It's going to be too difficult, too cumbersome, and I am now putting my job at risk.
And so, Dr. James, I guess if you, as a clinician, are trying to talk somebody into participating in something that could give us all valuable research, as well as potentially help the patient, you've got to get people to say yes, and then you got to get them to stay on till the trial's over.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, in rare disease and specifically in sarcoidosis, for perspective for the listeners who aren't aware, we have not had an FDA approved medication in over 70 years, which is a little bit embarrassing to say as one of the people in the field who's trying to develop these new medications and treatment options. But, for the patients, when there aren't a lot of FDA approved options, these clinical trials may be the only chance they have to access these novel treatment options. And, Tricia talked a lot about, the recruitment piece, but retention is just as important. So when we design these clinical trials, the number of patients we need to enroll is predetermined based on how likely it is we think this treatment option is going to work and how much of a signal statistically we need to see. And so we may enroll the perfect number of patients to achieve that outcome, but then if 20% of them have to drop out because they're at risk of losing their job or they can't keep up with the time commitment, it can totally derail a study. And, not only is that millions and millions of dollars invested by a pharmaceutical company, but it's also a new treatment option that now, we're not going to have an answer for that could have potentially worked if we could have kept patients in these trials.
Yeah, so obviously that makes a huge difference. You get them to sign up. I mean, if you lose 20%, what if you lose all your placebo or all of the people who are, taking the actual medication that's being tested? So how much do you think it'll make a difference for patients knowing they have this job protection to getting them to say yes and getting them to stay in?
Um, I think it's going to make a huge difference, to be honest with you. So, um, and I'll say two things in response to that. So, one is a general rule when we're approaching patients about potentially being in a clinical trial. Obviously, it's always a personal decision as to whether or not you want to be in a trial. And I feel like our role as the clinicians and researchers is to give them information about the trial. Talk about potential side effects, what's going to be expected of them and expected of us. But then also talk about what opportunities there are to help enable them to be in the trial. And so having this is actually huge. And specifically, I had a patient who had enrolled in a sarcoidosis trial, and the trial was going well, but then about 3 or 4 months into it, her employer started to really give a lot of pushback on the amount of time that was required for the trial. She was not from the area and, had to do a lot of travel. And so, obviously for the patient, it was very disconcerting because, things were actually going well for her in the study, and now she was going to have to potentially quit. But fortunately, I think it was about 5 months or so after we had gotten that clarification letter from FMLA, which I told her about. She talked to her employer. They sent the forms to me. We filled it out, and she got covered, and she was able to complete the trial, which would not have happened had we not been able to file that paperwork, thanks to the clarification.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking of the HR offices that I've dealt with over the years, and they can be some difficult people. So that's a big win.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
No,
not to
it
throw
was
HR under the bus, but they're
right.
they're just doing their job. But when they have that rule to fall back on, I guess that makes a big difference. So when you think about patients' experience and maybe how it could have gone without that FMLA clarification, what now do you think about the role that workplace policies will play in advancing medical research? And do you think we'll start to see more patients enroll and then stay in the trials? Do you think it'll actually work?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Because, historically, being involved in a clinical trial as a participant has not been looked at something that should really be viewed as this person is a champion. They're taking a risk to learn about a new medication that hopefully they'll benefit from. But really, the altruistic part of this is they're really, taking the time and effort to hopefully develop a new treatment option that, if it goes through FDA approval, future patients will have access to. And so removing FMLA and job protection is a barrier to enable those champions to be able to be in these clinical trials, and really give of themselves to the space is absolutely enormous. And it really is probably the biggest advancement in enabling participants to participate in clinical trials that I've heard of in the last 10 to 20 years.
All right, so Tricia, I want to pivot just a little bit because all right, now we've given employees the chance to go and participate without fear of losing their jobs. But nowhere does it say their employer has to pay them for those days. So they're either going to take a sick day, they're going to take a vacation day, and more companies are just going into this paid time off database where it all kind of comes under one funnel, as it were. So I know that FSR is working, and there's something called Champions for Change, the PTO initiative. What is that? How does it work? And how does this sort of dovetail with everything that we're looking at with everything we talked about so far?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've been working, as we said, we formed a coalition with incredible members, including industry partners, corporations, uh, leading clinicians, patients, and also we have a number of people that are joining us from a lot of different thought groups as nonprofits or medical societies. And so what we're trying to do collectively together is answer stepwise, how do we systemically address some of these challenges? And so the first was the FMLA, but then we started to think about that ourselves, right? In terms of this isn't going to address the payment challenge that people have. So what's the next thing that we need to do? So way back when we were presenting our initial work at the congressional briefing, we did propose to Congress at that time a $5,000 tax credit for those that are participating in clinical trials. And that's something that we hope to be able to continue to pursue as we continue on this path. So that's an area where we're keeping our eye on when is the right opportunity and when would be the right way to be able to propose that, to be able to have some supplemental income that's available for people in that. But right now, what we've done is launch a program called the Champions for Change PTO Initiative. And what this is an invitation to corporate America to join us in seeing that clinical trials is important for everyone. And whether someone is participating in a clinical trial for sarcoidosis or they're participating in a clinical trial for cancer or heart disease, what they are doing is advancing our understanding of science, and that is of value to everyone. And if you want to keep your employees healthy, what you need to do is acknowledge that this is a valuable thing that we need to contribute to. And through the Champions for Change initiative, what we're asking companies to do is join us by giving 1 day off of paid leave, at least 1 day, and some are giving more, at least 1 day off of paid leave to individuals who are participating in clinical trials. And this does a number of things. First, it does help to start to address the financial challenges. It extends more hours for people to take that time off to participate in a trial and have that as paid time. But it also changes the landscape of the conversations. The conversations are now taking place not only in the doctor's office with Dr. James presenting that as an option for their patients, but clinical trials are coming up now with your HR during your onboarding, during your orientation, as an opportunity for something that you can consider that might be beneficial to you. And this then puts that conversation in front of people. So many people wouldn't even know to ask for the family medical leave if it wasn't part of their conversations that they're having with their HR early. By having these conversations and having this built in, this makes it possible for these conversations to move forward. And a healthy workforce is what we need. A healthy workforce is a successful workforce, right? So this is a way of contributing to that idea. In addition to that, the coalition has been working on a number of different avenues to think about how we can balance some of the other financial burdens that were identified by our patients in the community and by Dr. James earlier. So taking that time off for making sure that you have funding to support kid care, or making sure you have time to support transportation or lodging, or whatever it is that you need to do in order to support you from a financial standpoint. This has always been a little bit tricky. As a trained bioethicist, I'll tell you that this is one of the areas that we kind of went down many years ago to protect vulnerable populations. And by we, I mean bioethicists, had gone down many years ago to protect vulnerable populations, but maybe overcorrected a little bit in the ways that we created the systems to deal with that. And what I mean is there has been regulations and guidelines that have been put in place, which now make it so that when people are considering providing support from a financial standpoint, and this is whether this is an academic study or whether this is a industry sponsored study, that gets extra scrutiny. And sometimes it's considered to provide something called undue influence, which means that for more vulnerable populations, they're more likely to enroll in the trial because there's a financial incentive for them to be a part of the trial, and it becomes an additional source of income. But really, that's not truly understanding what's happening in the space, and it's not another source of income. What it is doing is putting up barriers so that those that would need additional resources in order to participate in a trial, that don't have a deep community, that don't have the financial resources to hire their own childcare or pay for their own lodging, it's excluding them from the trials. And so we are also working to really explore how we might be able to make some changes in those ethical guidelines. And we are working alongside the coalition in thinking about what that would look like and how it could be impactful for the community. So we want to invite anyone that wants to join us, either as someone who wants to participate in the Champions for Change and give their employees one paid day off. And there's lots of ways that you can do that. You can use your volunteer time. You can put it into a floating holiday. There's lots of options, but making sure that you're calling that out for your employees. And we'd like to invite any organizations that would be interested in working on improving the compensation for clinical trial participants to join the coalition with us.
Now, I know that we've had a few already join. Do you want to mention? I know one of our pharmaceutical partners has agreed to step up and do that. Anybody else you want to mention? You want to mention that, and then
I
anybody else?
do want to mention that. Thank you for noting. Yeah, so
Sure.
I do want to mention that, Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals was the very first partner to join up onto this Champions for Change. And now we've been joined by many others, Mural Health, Sabai Global, the American Thoracic Society, Recursion Pharmaceuticals, Diverse Research Now, Eli Lilly and Company, and Bio News. And it's just continuing to grow. We're in conversations every single day about other groups that want to join this effort, that want to make it possible for their employees to have that extra time off to be able to take care of their health in this way.
It's interesting. So FSR has kind of led this charge, which let's pat ourselves on the back. And you in particular, Tricia, I know you've been very deeply involved in this, but this would include clinical trials for anything, right? For any illness, not just sarcoidosis. So if people are listening right now, their ears might be perking up. Well, maybe somebody's got cancer or something more common than sarcoidosis. This applies to them too.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to say that this is truly a model of a collective effort. This started with the Black patient community sharing with us specifically what those barriers were. And, honestly, job loss wasn't one of the ones that was at the top of the list for most of us. We weren't really thinking about that. And if the Black community had not identified that, we wouldn't have been having this conversation right now. So I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the patients that gave of their time to participate in that survey, and the patients that gave of their insights on the focus groups, and the patients that have been part of our advisory committees every step of the way in guiding this, as well as our other partners on the coalition and our clinical leaders in this. And right, this is a win for all chronic diseases. It's not just about sarcoidosis. And so it's really important for people who are listening to this. We have a web page that has the information on the family medical leave, that has information on our Champions for Change. And John, I know you'll put those in the run of show notes for
I will.
everyone. And if we can, get the word out. Get the word out to your own HR, bring it to your own HR. There's lots of things that everyone can do to raise awareness so that should you ever need this, or should you ever want to be part of a clinical trial as a healthy participant, this is an opportunity for you to do so.
That's amazing. So what do each of you want to take away from this? Dr. James, we'll start with you.
So certainly the importance of clinical trials and how much we need quality clinical trials and willing participants who are able to be in the study and obviously stay in the study. And honestly, there is a lot of positive momentum in the rare disease space, and specifically in sarcoidosis. And really, in my opinion, I think now is certainly the time to get involved. And that doesn't necessarily mean, as a participant in a clinical trial, but even just supporting patients, increasing awareness, getting the word out, like Tricia said. I can tell you I've had a lot of conversations with my colleagues who are clinical researchers in other disease states, and they were, almost as excited, if not more, than I was to hear about this, because they've encountered this in their careers as well, with, it being a barrier to patients. And then, specifically to the patients themselves, start having that conversation. It may not be that you need to be in a clinical trial at this point, but be a knowledge sink. Every patient, in my opinion, I tell them an educated patient is a good patient, and they tend to do better overall because they understand things, they know what options are out there, but then they also can become an advocate for the person down the street who needs help when they get diagnosed. And this really is something that's going to have a really positive impact on clinical trials and chronic diseases, and just spread the word.
Yeah. Tricia, what would you say? What takeaways would you like?
Absolutely. I agree with spread the word, and to give you very concrete ways to do that. Please share out with your own HR that this is something that is now available to patients. Get the word right in their hands. The letter is on our website. Hand it to them. Say this is now an extended right. They should know about that, right? Another concrete way to do that is to reach out to your doctors. Bring it along to your doctors. As Dr. James said, all these doctors that are out there, they're trying to do things to make their patients better every single day. They'll be excited to know that this is a new way that they can support a patient. So get that in front of them so that they can think about that, whether that's for you or it's for others, right? Share your story out. We're looking for those that are participating in clinical trials to share their patient stories. This is so important. And if you have ever used FMLA, or if you use FMLA now that you know about this, in this way, help us get the story out that way too, because this will be absolutely critical for us to penetrate all the different information and noise that's out there in the world right now. We can't compete with TikTok too easily in this world, right? And then, if you're an employer, this is a great opportunity for you. Join the Champions for Change. Give your employees a paid day off for participating in clinical trials. Look at the FMLA and make sure that your HR understands how they would use that. And then finally, join the movement. We have a fantastic working group coalition that, as you can hear, has made significant strides in just the year since it's been formed, in really driving this change forward. And if you want to be a part of that kind of change that down the road can change science for everyone, which will lead to better health for all of us, join us. We'd love to have you.
Outstanding. Well, Dr. James and Tricia, thank you for sharing your expertise, your experiences, obviously your passion for this work. 40 trips to the hill, Tricia. That's I don't know how you got. I mean, if the average person wanted to make one trip to the hill, that would be a big deal in their life, and here you've been 40 times. This is a really, really strong and powerful conversation, and I'm hoping that the listeners will take away not only the importance of clinical trial participation, but also some of the ways that we can make it accessible for everyone. And then I just want to say that to everyone who's supported Ignore No More from the very beginning, thank you for that. This win is yours as much as it is ours collectively. We've seen how focusing on communities most impacted, and Tricia, you mentioned the Black community, which is where this is happening. Those folks were saying, I can't participate, I'll get fired from my job. And we've already talked about why that cannot happen. And so this is really just the beginning. So let's continue to follow the work of FSR, the Coalition to Transform Clinical Trial Engagement. Jump in wherever you can, because together I believe that we can continue to make progress. And by the way, folks, if you haven't already checked out episode 1 to kind of hear how we got to this conversation today, please go back and do that. I'll make it easy for you by putting a link in the show notes. But that'll be the episode right before this one. We'll be talking about how it's changing the game for everybody, patients, employers, and the future of research. So Tricia and Dr. James, again, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, John.
Thanks, John.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
So thanks to Tricia and Dr. James for their time today. Man, what an accomplishment to be able to get this pushed through and to get the government to say, you know what, we need to make sure that people can participate in this and use FMLA as the basic guideline to get it done. And of course, Dr. James, for all the work that he's been doing. More about Dr. James here in just a moment. But if you've been downloading and listening to the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast episode by episode, first of all, thank you. Thank you so much. I watch the numbers as the number of downloads grows episode by episode, and I do see that people discover the podcast and then they go back and they start listening to the back episodes. And so long after these episodes are released, the numbers of downloads continues. The numbers continue, if you will, to go up, and that means that people have found something that you find helpful, and that is why I do this, but not to make it about me. But the point of all of that is to say thank you, and that you know then that this is part 2 of this FMLA Clarification series. In part 1, FSR CEO Mary McGowan joined me, along with Emily Dickens, the Chief of Staff and Head of Government Affairs and Corporate Secretary for the Society of Human Resources Management, better known as SHRM, which has hundreds of thousands of members. Basically, most of the HR professionals in the United States are members of SHRM, and the fact that we were able to get somebody so far up in their organization to join us here on the podcast is amazing. And the job now is to get the word out. That's what this is all part of, is to get the word out to HR professionals everywhere that this clarification exists, so that patients won't have to work so hard to present their cases if they want to participate in a clinical trial. And remember, as I said, it's not just for sarcoidosis, it's for any disease. Now, toward that end, Dr. James has written an op-ed which has been published in an online organization called STAT, S-T-A-T. You've seen this on the medical shows, right? When somebody comes into the emergency room, we need that STAT, which means right away, this is critical. Everybody drop what you're doing and come running. So I think that's really a clever name, right? And so I just pulled what STAT says about itself, but it says at STAT, our mission is to deliver trusted, tough-minded journalism on the business of making medicines, health tech, science, public health, hospitals, and insurance. So a journalistic-minded medical journal, if you will, that's always looking at new developments. And here's another blurb about them. With an award-winning newsroom, STAT gives you indispensable insights and exclusive stories on the technologies, personalities, power brokers, and political forces driving massive changes in the life science industry and a revolution in human health. These are the stories that matter to us all. So STAT and the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast are both shining a light on this amazing advancement in clinical trials and granting permissions needed to patients so we can move the needle to find cures and treatments. But so what has STAT done that I have also done? I love that I can mention this podcast and STAT in the same sentence. But Dr. James has written an op-ed which has been published in STAT. And so I have been, and honestly, I don't live in the medical community. Even though I'm a journalist and even though I have this podcast, my job by and large is to cover local news here on the NBC station in Roanoke, Virginia, where I've been the anchor just about forever. I guess I've logged over 33 years now. But I'm not reading medical journals every day. Most of them are above my head or just, if it's not sarcoidosis related, I'm not very interested in it. But what I've been doing is I've been looking at all the responses from the members of the medical community who are my fellow board members on the FSR Board of Directors, and they are all in this thread congratulating Dr. James for his essay and also commenting on how difficult it is to get an op-ed published in STAT. which is very highly regarded by these medical professionals who are on our board of directors. So that's what tells me that this is really, really a big deal. But again, it's putting that information out there in the medical community so everybody involved with sarcoidosis and everybody else who wants to do a clinical trial is now aware of this FMLA clarification. And there is a full court press going on across the country right now to get everybody aware, doctors, HR professionals, attorneys, whoever touches the need to know when it comes to clinical trials, whoever touches that, we want them to know that this clarification is out there. Okay, and so in STAT, and I'm going to put a link. This is a long way of saying I'm going to put a link to Dr. James' essay in STAT, his op-ed, and you can read it. But he's going to talk more about what you heard him talk about here today. And, congratulations to him. And again, to FSR for working behind the scenes to get a prestigious publication such as STAT to pick up this op-ed. And now the next thing that FSR is driving for is Champions for Change, which would urge companies to not only allow the patient time off for the participation in the trial, but also to pay them for that time off. At least for 1 day. And I talked about this a little bit on the last podcast, but my company, if I was to go to them and I wasn't going to be missing too much time, I think they would say, okay, we'll write that down as a sick day and we'll be happy to compensate you and go do what you need to do with a clinical trial. I don't know that all companies would be that forgiving. I don't know that all of them can be. And maybe it's because of a rule, maybe it's because it's a smaller company, and if there's only 10 people working there and one person is gone, well, there's nobody to fill in, right? If you got a major Fortune 500 corporation, they can probably distribute the workload among some other people and still get what they need done. But anyway, the next thing would be this is Champions for Change, and that is a term that's been coined by FSR. And now the next thing they're doing is urging companies to sign on and to allow that to happen. And companies are beginning to do it. We're in the very early stages, but it's beginning to happen. So thanks again to Tricha from FSR and Dr. Ennis James for joining me today and for furthering the mission for all of us with respect to finding treatments and perhaps one day a cure for sarcoidosis. All right, this is a good time to contact me if you'd like to share your story on the podcast, carlinagency@gmail.com. The official Sarc Fighter song is Zombie by Mark Steyer and his band, the White Hot Lizards. Mark is a fellow Sarc Fighter. You can hear an update from him in episode 118. I normally release every other Monday. As I'm speaking today, my trusty boxer Dougal is curled up right here by my feet in my office. My other trusty dog, Shandy, was barking a lot, and she had to go to timeout again. She just doesn't understand that you have to be quiet while someone's recording. But I'll be rejoining Shandy here shortly. The backstory for the founding of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research is episode 11 with Andrea and Redding Wilson. Andrea is a fellow Sarc Fighter. Don't forget to follow Sarc Fighter on Facebook, on Instagram, even Peloton. My cycling blog, Carlin the Cyclist, has a section called Cycling with Sarcoidosis, and a lot of people have found me that way. If you are new here and you just want to know what sarcoidosis is, try listening to episode 2 with Dr. Simon Hart. My story is episode 1. Please send me an email if you'd like to appear on the show. It's in the show notes, carlinagency@gmail.com. And until next time, keep fighting.
Learn to suffer, you feel pain someday. Learn endurance, your strength will fade away. Dead man walking, trying to keep up the pace. Dead man